Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, from time to time, I like to go into my analytics in the YouTube studio. It tells you what your audience is watching other than you. And this video popped up as one of the ones that a lot of you have watched. It's from a channel I'm not familiar with. It's called Casual Lectures. They have about 36,000 subscribers. And the video is called Historical Misconceptions for You to Bring Up During Family Barbecue. About 2 years ago, actually, almost this exact day, 2 years ago, I did a similar reaction to a video from Salmonella, who did one about historical misconceptions. And so I thought it was time to visit another one of these. So looks like they're broken down by chapter here, so I'm able to kind of see each one's maybe a minute or two long. So what I'll do, as much as I can, because I know I say these things and then I don't always do it, is I will wait until the entire section plays for that misconception before I offer my commentary. Let it play in its entirety, and then I can't talk today. And then I might even offer a couple of my own at the end, some of my own misconceptions that I get really frustrated by, that I hear all the time. So links in the description if you want to check out Casual Lectures, not only this video, but any of their other stuff without my commentary. Let's dive in.
Hey kid, yeah, you over there? You think you know a lot about history? Think again, because like many other people, you are still spreading some common misconceptions.
Getting some real Salmonella vibes here with the drawing and the introduction and stuff. They say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so...
But don't worry, I will take you by the hand and teach you how to become a well-educated scholar. Number 1, medieval scholars believed that the earth is flat. Let's start with one of humanity's oldest myths and misconceptions that is still around even today. The belief that the earth is flat survived throughout the ages, and most people believe that medieval scholars strongly believed in this. However, this is a common misconception. In fact, many medieval scholars knew and even proved that the earth was round way before the days of modern science. The shape and size of the earth were calculated with astounding precision by Eratosthenes in ancient Greece and were known pretty well, at least by the educated elite, through the Christian age. But if even ancient Greek scholars knew this fact, then where did this myth come from? The idea that medieval scholars thought the earth was flat appears to date from the 17th century as part of the campaign by Protestants against Catholic teaching, gaining much traction in the 1800s due to inaccurate stories and historical recollections. And we can't talk about the flat earth without talking about Columbus. A second claim connected to the flat earth is that Columbus faced opposition to his attempt to find a western route to Asia because people thought the earth was flat and he'd fall off. In reality, Columbus did face opposition on his voyage, but not from people who thought he'd drop off the edge of the world. Instead, people believed he'd predicted too small a globe and would run out of supplies before he made it around to Asia. It was not the edges of the world people feared, but the world being too big and round for them to cross with the technology available.
100% true. So a couple of things about this. Number one of the earliest people, and I don't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, it may be the one he mentioned, that figured out that the earth was round, actually did kind of a cool experiment where he stood in one place in Egypt and measured the length and direction of shadows, and then had someone else stand in another spot in Egypt many miles away and check the length and direction of the shadows, and figured out that the shadows were different, which meant that the earth couldn't possibly be flat because they would have been identical in terms of their direction, their angle, and all that kind of stuff. They even, in BC, were able to fairly accurately, roughly estimate the size of the earth. So that was even pretty well established. The main thing that was going on in Columbus's time was a debate about whether or not the sun revolved around the moon, or the sun revolved around the earth, or the earth revolved around the sun. And the idea that it was a heliocentric solar system where the earth revolved around the sun was considered heresy within a lot of people in the Catholic Church. So that was a big debate. But there were about as many people thinking the earth was flat back then as there are now. But back then they had a little bit more of an excuse to get away with something like that.
Number 2, Walt Disney invented Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse may be one of the most recognizable cartoon characters in history, and he helped turn Walt Disney into a major force in Hollywood. So it isn't really surprising that most people believe that Walt Disney invented their most famous character, but most origin stories gloss over the fact that Walt Disney didn't create Mickey Mouse. In fact, Mickey was inspired by one of Disney's creations, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, after Disney lost animation rights to Universal. Looking for a new star, Disney turned to animator Ub Iwerks to transform Oswald into a mouse. Iwerks drew Mickey, but Disney took the credit, even winning a 1932 Oscar for creating the character. And here is another interesting fact. The famous mouse was supposed to be named Mortimer originally. The name didn't last. There are a number of tales attempting to explain how and why, the most popular being that Disney's wife hated the name and suggested its replacement, but soon he was ready for his debut as Mickey. Number 3.
All right, so let's add to that one as well and say that there is absolutely no evidence that Walt Disney had his body frozen and that it's somewhere waiting to be thawed out when the technology allows for it. There are people who have done that. I think Ted Williams is one of them, the baseball player. But I've visited Walt Disney's grave. Now, granted, you could have a grave marker without a body inside. I understand that. But no, there's no evidence whatsoever that Walt Disney had himself frozen. He's buried in a cemetery outside of L.A., with a lot of other famous people in that cemetery. I'll throw in one of my own here while we're at it, because I did look over the chapters, so I know what we're kind of coming with here pretty soon. Here's one. Businesses must accept cash as legal tender. A lot of people have this idea that because it says on the money that this is legal tender for all debts, public and private, that means that businesses are required by law to accept cash. Makes me think of my favorite character on a TV show, Ron Swanson, who goes to the UK and tries to make people take his money. No, it is. People are not required by law to accept cash at their business. The exception to that is that cash must be accepted to pay off debts specifically. So if you have a debt, you can pay your creditor in cash and they have to accept it. But otherwise, no, that's not the case. I've got a bunch more that I'll throw at you as we go along here.
Forbidden fruit was an apple. Both the apple and Eve get an undeserved bad rap in the story
We have no
of
idea what it
Paradise.
was.
According to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve were evicted from paradise for eating the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden. There's no mention of any apples. Some biblical scholars think it was a fig, since Adam and Eve dressed in fig leaves, while Muslim scholars think it may have been wheat or possibly grapes. Aquila Ponticus, a 2nd century translator of the Old Testament, may have assumed that the apple tree in the Song of Solomon was the fruit-bearing tree in Genesis. 2 centuries later, St. Jerome also linked the apple tree to the phrase, "There wast thou corrupted," in his Latin translation of the Old Testament. Number 4.
There's absolutely no mention whatsoever in Genesis of what the fruit was. It just says that it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The whole point of the tree was not that there was somehow something nefarious about the tree itself. It was really more of a test for Adam and Eve to see if they could be obedient, and they failed miserably.
Neanderthals were unintelligent. It's a widely held notion that Neanderthals were dim-witted and that their inferior intelligence allowed them to be driven to extinction by the much brighter ancestors of modern humans. However, this couldn't be further from the truth, and there's no evidence to suggest that Neanderthals were dumber than Homo sapiens. They had just as advanced tools and were able to hunt and communicate just as well. Evidence from multiple archaeological sites in Europe suggests that Neanderthals hunted as a group, using the landscape to aid them. Researchers have shown that Neanderthals likely herded hundreds of bison to their death by steering them into a sinkhole in southwestern France. Ornaments have also been collected at Neanderthal sites. Taken together, these findings suggest that Neanderthals had cultural rituals and symbolic communication. Number 5.
See, so we're talking about Neanderthals. This is really prehistory, so not really an area that I'm familiar with. But yeah, I can't imagine there's any possible way that we would know whether they were stupid just based on finding some skulls around, right? We just don't know enough because it was prehistory, so there's not a written record, so we really know very little about them. All right, I'm going to throw another one at you, a real simple one here. The idea that President William Howard Taft once got stuck in a bathtub at the White House or in any other place because he was so fat. No evidence whatsoever that that ever happened. There's no contemporary story saying that happened. It's just one of those things people say that has no basis in fact.
5. Ancient Roman gladiators were all slaves. Films like Gladiator and Spartacus popularized the myth that ancient Roman gladiators were slaves, forced to fight to the death for the enjoyment of spoiled aristocrats. But that myth is more Hollywood than history. In fact, many gladiators volunteered to fight, signing up to join gladiator schools for glory and wealth. Some of these gladiators were former soldiers, knights, or even upper-class Romans who wanted to show off their strength. Many trained to wound, not kill, their opponents. And even in the male-dominated Rome, for several centuries, women also fought as gladiators. Moreover, the gladiators won massive fame among the lower classes. Their portraits graced the walls of many public places. Children played with gladiator action figures made of clay, and the most successful fighters even endorsed products just like the top athletes of today. Number 6.
And, for that matter, that whole idea we have that the emperor would go like, this, and then he'd either go thumbs up or thumbs down to tell you that you needed to kill him. We get that backwards. Thumbs up actually meant kill him. Thumbs down meant don't kill him. For some reason, it just doesn't compute with our brains that way, and so Hollywood does it the opposite way.
300 Spartans defeated the Persian army. This legend flourished in the 21st century when a film spread the iconic image of six-pack bearing men in red cloaks fighting a fantastical force. There is just one small problem. This is wrong. There weren't just 300 men, and they weren't all Spartans. So let's get to the truth. Although there were 300 Spartans present at the defense of Thermopylae, there were at least 4,000 allies involved on the first 2 days and 1,500 men involved in the fatal last stand. And even their heroic victory is completely made up. Caught between the main Persian army and 10,000 men to their rear, all were involved in fighting and wiped out. Only Thebans who surrendered remained. Number 7.
All right, so a couple other things about that. Leonidas was like 60 years old at the Battle of Thermopylae. He wasn't young, buff-looking Gerard Butler that we see in the movie, right? And yeah, a lot of those guys, the thousands that helped hold the hot gates, as they're called, Thermopylae, for the first couple of days, left before the final battle, and they were, in fact, according to the story, betrayed by a Greek whose name does mean nightmare. I think that's what his name means. And they did sneak around behind them, and that's how they were able to finally win the battle. But it was never just the 300 Spartans. There were 300 Spartans. Oh, here's one of our favorites about Napoleon being short. I'll give you another one here, and I've mentioned this one before. Paul Revere never rode through the countryside shouting, "The British are coming, the British are coming." Number one, the people he was shouting to were also British, so it would have made no sense for him to do that. He was one of several riders, and what he most likely said, according to the contemporary accounts, was the regulars are out, or the regulars are coming out. That's what he said, and that's what other men like Dawes were saying as well.
Napoleon was very short. We move on from the legendary Spartans to another famous military tactician. Napoleon was actually a bit above 5'5" inches, or about 160 centimeters, which was...
I think he was closer to 5'6", maybe even in some accounts 5'7". I don't think he was only 5'5".
pretty average for the time. The idea that Napoleon was short came mostly from British cartoonist James Gilray, who started illustrating Napoleon as very short, and other cartoonists followed suit. Imagine you create a comic to mock a national enemy, and you do such a good job that even centuries later people still believe you. James Gilray completely roasted Napoleon, and the general even acknowledged this. Napoleon would later say Gilray did more than all the armies of Europe to bring me down.
And let's not miss the fact that he was still taller than Lord Nelson, Horatio Nelson. One of the great heroes of the British, was only 5'4", I think. And part of this too, Napoleon, we've talked about this, he had a elite guard, like a bodyguard, that were all like over 6 feet. And so being around them necessarily made him look short. It's like if I'm 5'10", but if I hung out with a bunch of NBA players, I would look really short all the time.
Number 8, Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake."
Nope.
For number 8, we stay in medieval France and talk about the only quote on this list. This is one of the...
Got to pause here for a second and say that the late 18th century is not medieval France. Most people put the end of the medieval period at around the late 1400s. In England, we usually date it to 1485 with the Battle of Bosworth. A lot of times people date it to the sack of Constantinople in the middle of the 15th century. Either way, late 1700s, not medieval period.
The most famous historical quotes, so it might surprise some of you that this myth was completely based on hearsay. First off, this would have been uncharacteristic for the Queen, since she was known for her charity work, which included feeding poor and starving people. And in reality, that phrase had already been around and attributed to other sources before Marie, so she can't be responsible for this strange quote. Jacques Rousseau had written a very similar phrase, saying a great princess had said the words years before it was attributed to Marie, when Marie was only 10. Thus, she couldn't possibly have originated the phrase. Number
100% true. And he mentioned the part I was going to mention, which is the author that wrote a similar phrase when she was still a child over in Austria and could not have said that. Here's one. Abner Doubleday invented baseball. No, didn't happen. He did help kind of formalize the rules of baseball, and I think some people give him credit for that, and that's where it all comes from. But no, he did not invent baseball.
9. Viking helmets had horns or wings. For our next historic misconception, we will take a little detour in the history of medieval fashion. When you think of a Viking, the image of a horned helmet almost immediately pops up, but that's almost certainly not true. The image of Vikings wearing horned helmets was again borrowed from art, from the scenography of an 1876 production of the Der Ring des Nibelungen opera cycle by Richard Wagner. Another myth about Vikings is the memorable event when King Canute, in an alleged fit of delusional arrogance, ordered the tides to retreat. Much more likely is that he was actually trying to make a smart point to his people, showing them that no one can command nature and no man is all-powerful. Imagine you are a Viking leader and try to teach your subjects a wise lesson, but since they are too stupid to understand it, you go down in history as an arrogant madman. Number 10, cowboys didn't
I've never heard this one. This will be interesting.
Wear cowboy hats. We continue our journey through historic fashion and arrive in the Wild West. And as ironic as it may sound, cowboys didn't wear cowboy hats, at least most of them didn't. The iconic Stetson came onto the market in 1865 and it wasn't popular until the end of the 19th century. A cowboy's preferred choice of hat, the derby, also known as the bowler. Famous gunslinger and gambler Bat Masterson also favored the derby. The classic photo of American West gunfighter Billy the Kid depicts the outlaw wearing what resembles a top hat. Men commonly wore hats on the American frontier, and derby hats were functional.
And that's not just unique to the American frontier. Men commonly wore hats outside in general. Look at pictures from like 1910, 1920, 1930. If they're outside, the men are wearing hats. It was just what they did at that time.
For various occasions. Most photographs from that time feature men wearing them, and one of the reasons they were popular is because they stayed on in windy conditions. Number 11. Gunfights happened all the time in the American West. We stay in the Wild West and take a closer look at their culture. Hollywood westerns always show multiple gunfights, with gunslingers drawing to shoot in saloons, on Main Street, or anywhere else. But the true history of the American West had a lot fewer gunfights. In fact, very few men even wore the signature low-slung pistol holsters, and the tense standoffs in films rarely happened in real life. And the signature quick-draw duel, a feature in many films that imitates European dueling, apparently only occurred 2 times in the Old West. Even the word gunslinger was invented for a 1920 Western film. Instead, armed men in the American West were actually called shootists. So in reality, the Wild West was rather boring, and if you are interested in Wild West stories, just play Red Dead Redemption for the 10th time.
And there was actually a movie called The Shootist that came out. I'm trying to remember if that was a John Wayne movie or not, but I think this is one of those things where, because it was something that happened in that time, and it did occasionally happen, like a lot of things, we take it and show it happening all the time. If you watch a movie or a TV show like Justified, which I think is one of the 5 or 6 best TV shows that has ever existed, the acting, the directing, the writing, it's all phenomenal. It's really a modern Western set in Eastern Kentucky. There's no way on earth you would have a deputy U.S. Marshal that killed the number of people that this guy killed and would still have a job. Obviously, it's all kind of taken to an extreme for the purposes of entertainment. And so as we look back, because we focus on the stories of people like Wyatt Earp or Billy the Kid, who did kill multiple people in shootouts, we tend to take those stories and apply that to that entire time period in that entire part of America, when it really was more of a rare thing rather than an all-the-time thing. But those are the stories we're familiar with.
And finally, number 12, AD means after death.
Anno Domini.
You always thought that you were a smart lad because you know what AD means. Well, I have to disappoint you, sir, because AD doesn't actually mean after death. It actually means Anno Domini,
Year of our
which
Lord.
translates to in the year of our Lord in Latin. After hearing all these facts, you properly realize how stupid you were before, but now you are finally on par with people like Albert Einstein.
So the Anno Domini thing wouldn't even make sense because our best estimate on when Jesus was actually crucified is probably closer to around 30 AD. Some people will say 33, but I think it's probably 30 AD, based on what we see in the Bible and things like that, and the parallel stories going on, like Herod, probably born around 4 BC, things like that. BC does mean before Christ. Of course, now we use BCE, which is before Common Era, to take the religious aspect out of it, and CE for Common Era. All right, let me give you another one, and this one will get some people that'll argue with me about it. The Bismarck, or any other German battleships for that matter, were referred to as he and not she, like other ships. Here's the origin of the Bismarck he thing. Captain Lindemann, who was the captain of the Bismarck, the only captain of the Bismarck because it sank on basically its first mission, made a remark to one of his other officers that a battleship that powerful should be known as he and not she, and required the people in his presence, the officers, to refer to the ship that way. That comes to us from the highest ranking surviving officer from the Bismarck. There's no written account of that being the case. There's no other person who says that was the case. One guy says Captain Lindemann said it that way. Everybody else in the German Navy, in the British Navy, in the world referred to Bismarck as she. And Bismarck's sister ship, yes, sister ship, not brother ship, the Tirpitz, was known as the Lonely Queen of the North. Some people have told me, well, any German battleship that's named after a guy is a he. Well, Tirpitz was named after a guy. It's a she, the Lonely Queen of the North. Okay, so one person said that he heard from one other person that they should refer to it as a he. And that's why everybody uses he and insists that that's what Bismarck was. I will go to my grave arguing that one because that is not how 99.9999% of the people in World War II referred to Bismarck. All right. And then Great Wall of China can be visible from space. It's like 30 feet wide at its widest. It's very similar in color to the surrounding landscape. It's not even one continuous wall. It's actually a series of walls that aren't all connected to each other. And there are way bigger things on Earth than the Great Wall of China that can be visible from space way sooner than that would. Visible from the moon, as some people say, but that's ridiculous. So the first reference to the Great Wall of China being visible from space actually was written in 1938, before anybody had been in space and no object had been put into space by man. So there's not even any way we would know that for sure. But if you think about the size of objects, just the Pentagon, for example, way bigger than the Great Wall of China, would be way easier to see from space. A football field is wider than the Great Wall of China. Can't see that from space. So anyway, I've beaten that one to death. Let me know your thoughts. Add some of your own historical misconceptions to the comment section below, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.